Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome along to this Germinal webinar on Get More from Forage, and starting with soil. With World Soils Day being on Thursday, which is the 5th of December, we felt that this was an opportune moment to highlight the crucial role our soils play in farming's role in climate-smart ways to produce more food for an ever-increasing population, but to do it in an environmentally sustainable way. The old adage that the soil beneath our feet is the second most important asset on any farm has never been more relevant. Before I hand over to Mary, just a few words of introduction about Germinal. We are, as it says there, a sixth generation or a family-owned firm. We've been in the go for 200 years, and for 150 of those years, we have been a specialist seed company with a focus on grass seed for forage and for amenity. The business has always taken a pioneering approach to science and research, and this has led very much to the partnership that was formed in 1986 with at Ibers, and after that all the grass varieties that were produced there come out with the Aber prefix on. Through time it became apparent that the next logical step, which took place in 2021, was for 15 of those grass and clover breeders based at Aberystwyth and some of the technicians who worked at the university as well and tended the plots and the national list trials to come and work directly for Germinal. This has been a huge success. These staff are all embedded at the university, but they work solely for Germinal. And this puts us as a customer-facing team that you see here tonight in a much stronger position, because we have direct access to the scientists and the breeders, and we can relay back the objectives and the challenges that our farmer customers face. And as a result of this, this focus on R&D means that 15% of all the staff involved in Germinal are involved in research and development. It's a huge element of what we do and something we're extremely proud of as a company. I'm going to stop sharing my screen just now and I'll hand over to Mary.
Good evening, everyone. Delighted to have so many on board on the webinar here this evening. So this evening, I want to talk to you about getting a better understanding of the health of the soil on your farm. And I suppose what I want you to take away from this evening's webinar is a few simple tools you can use at home on your own farm to better assess your own soil and to look, I suppose, beyond just the chemical aspects of soil health and get a bit more of a better understanding in terms of the physical and biological health of your soil as well. So soil health is defined as the continued capacity of soil to function as a vital living organism that sustains plants, animals, and humans. As William has said, it's the most important asset we have on our farm. And I think it's fair to say in agriculture, we have been overlooking soil health in recent decades. And this has probably been happening for two main reasons. Firstly, we do have a relative lack of understanding of soil, or we have up until recent years at least, due to the complex ecosystem that it is. And secondly, generally grass or crops will grow above ground, so we don't really need to think twice about what's happening below the ground. If we think about the health of our soils, currently in England and Wales, about 4 million hectares of soil are at risk of compaction and over 2 million hectares of soil are at risk of erosion. Intensive agriculture has caused arable soils to lose up to 60% of organic carbon over the last number of years, and soil degradation is costing in the region of about 1.2 billion per year. So anything we can do to improve soil health is going to have a significant effect in terms of improving the potential output of our farm without requiring any additional inputs. And obviously that's going to have a positive effect in terms of reducing the cost of production and will have a significant effect on farm profitability. And resilience in our soils has never been more important as we need to feed a growing world population, and also as we are dealing with much more intensive extremities in terms of climate change, be it droughts or floods. A healthy and resilient soil will help us to withstand some of the challenges that are being put upon us from an environmental perspective. So looking at soil health, I suppose there's three legs of the stool, if you want to call them that, or three main characteristics which we need to focus on. And these are your biological, your chemical, and your physical health attributes. We need to consider them all together rather than any one as an individual, and having them all efficiently working together is going to be where we optimize the performance of our soils and optimize the productivity of our soils. You're probably all well tuned into the chemical aspect of your soil health. At this stage, most or almost every farmer is doing regular soil tests and able to quantify their pH, P and K requirements of an individual field. Lime is the most important fertilizer we have on our farm, and correcting deficiencies in terms of pH with lime, where those deficiencies occur, is critical to improving overall soil health, and that'll have a knock-on impact in terms of your biological and physical aspects of soil health as well. It is useful when we are soil testing to compare results over time and to make sure we're trending in the right direction, and Harley's going to talk about that in much more detail later on in his presentation. It's important that we target the optimum pH for the crop you're growing, and use your soil tests and respond to them by applying the right nutrients in the right amount at the right place and at the right time. Understanding your soil textures is also useful to consider when we talk about soil health, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on as well. If we look at soil pH and get a better understanding of why it's so important, typically, for grassland soils, your optimum pH is 6.2 to 6.5, and where we include clover in those pastures, our optimum pH is closer to between 6.5 and up as far as 7. And where we're at that optimal level of pH, that's where your nutrients are going to be most available to the plant you're growing above the ground. At lower levels of soil pH, we start to see nutrients become more locked up and less available to the plants we're trying to grow. So it is fundamental that we correct soil pH where we have deficiencies. It's the cheapest fertilizer you can buy, and it's going to have a huge impact in making the nutrients that are already there in your soil more available to the plants you're trying to grow above ground. Rainfall can have a significant impact on your lime requirement, and you can lose anywhere up to about 625 kilos of lime per hectare from a soil, depending on your rainfall level across the year. And nitrogen application will also have a significant effect. So for each 1 kilo of nitrogen applied, either as CAN or urea, that typically requires 2 kilos of lime to neutralize the acidifying effect of that fertilizer. So it is important to consider, both the environmental and management influences and how that does affect the change in soil pH over time. If we look at the current state, and I've a slide up here on the Irish soils, but it's the information is fairly similar for soils in the UK as well. So currently 19% of soils in Ireland are what we would consider to be good in terms of their soil fertility. So this is optimum soil pH above 6.2 and a P and K index of 3 or 4. Now, I just want to note at this point for our UK audience, we are aware that your optimum pH will be considered at index 2. We have a different scale, we measure it in a different way here in Ireland. So what we consider an optimum P and K index is actually index 3. And 4 would be considered to be excess. But overall, what would be considered optimum in Ireland and UK, we're seeing a similar number of soils falling into what we would call good soil fertility categories across the two countries. And interesting to look at the trends in terms of good soil fertility over time as well. So from 2010, 2011 up to 2017, about 10 to 11% of soils were at that good level of soil fertility. And it has been increasing steadily, albeit a little bit slowly since then. So currently about 18.5% or 19% of our soils have what we would call good soil fertility. But I think it's important to note that that means over 80% of our soils do not have what we would consider good chemical soil fertility. And it's, one of the easiest aspects of soil health to measure. We are all already doing it on our farms. And I think it's important that we pay better attention and use our soil test results to make sure we're applying the right nutrients to the right fields at the right time to try build up our soil fertility in over the next number of years. Just to have a quick look at cation exchange capacity, and this reflects the ability of a soil to hold positively charged cations, including important nutrients. They can be easily exchanged with other cations, and these adsorbed cations are then plant available. High cation exchange capacity soils have what we would consider strong binding capacity, and typically this is seen in heavier soils with a high clay content or high organic matter content. They're generally considered more fertile, and we see less movement or less loss of nutrients from these soils. Low cation exchange capacity soils, on the other hand, have poor binding capacity. These would typically be your sandy soils with little clay or very low or no organic matter content. And these soils are much more prone to leaching, and they're also prone to acidifying more quickly and developing deficiencies in potassium, magnesium, and other cations. We can improve our cation exchange capacity, and I suppose a lot of what we're talking about here this evening in terms of your physical, your biological, or your chemical soil health can be improved by optimizing the pH of your soil, adding organic matter, which has a very high cation exchange capacity in its own right, and reducing compaction of our soils. Moving on to the biological aspects of soil health. So, as you're all well aware, soil is a living material which hosts about a quarter of our planet's biodiversity. 1 gram of soil contains in excess of 1 billion bacteria. So it's hugely important that we maintain biological activity of our soil. Soil organic matter is the living or once living materials which are in the soil, and it is a source of food for many organisms, both those which we can see, the likes of your earthworms, and obviously those which are invisible to the naked eye, which are the bacteria or microbacteria within the soil. Organic matter will improve the health of our soil and also benefit the structure of our soil as well. So where we can, it is important to add organic matter to the soil to try build it up and feed the organisms living within the soil. Organic matter will benefit the physical, chemical, and biological properties of the soil, and I suppose other ways we can do that is consider, reducing the tillage impact on soil, so tilling our soil only when absolutely necessary, and also increasing the diversity in our pastures. So I suppose what I mean here is moving away from monocultures of grass and moving into grass clover swards or even multi-species swards. It's going to have a hugely beneficial impact in terms of our soil health. And also, considering, strong rotations in our tillage rather than just focusing on one species in our tillage rotations. And I suppose what I have seen myself in recent years as working with farmers is where we have more diverse plants above ground. So where we have, multi-species swards or higher clover contents, where you dig those fields or dig those soils and look below the ground, you're seeing a much higher earthworm count compared to swards which would have perennial ryegrass only. So, it is plant diversity above ground does have a beneficial effect on the biology below ground, and that's probably due to increased root depth, increased concentration of roots, opening up the soil and allowing more earthworm movement through the soil. Farmyard manure is an excellent source of nutrients to stimulate biological activity in the soil and increase microbial biomass. And it is a highly valuable resource on your farm. And I suppose it's really, really important to consider which fields are going to get the most benefit by applying that farmyard manure rather than, just putting it out in the same field year in, year out. A simple means of looking at our biological health of our soil is doing an earthworm count. So earthworms are a very good indicator of biological health in the soil, and an earthworm can eat their own body weight in food every day. They break this down and recycle it back into the soil. The casts, which the earthworm then leaves behind, are actually higher in nutrients than the soil around them. So earthworms are crucially important from a carbon cycling perspective. They mobilize nutrients in the soil. And as they channel through the soil, they increase air movement, they open up channels in the soil, they increase air movement and also allow better water infiltration through the soil. And water infiltration is becoming increasingly important, as we see, and we've seen here in Ireland in recent weeks and recent years as well, and it's happening in the UK as well. As we have increased deluges or downfalls of rain, if our soils can take that water away quicker, it reduces the risk of flooding. So, again, crucially important to have soils which are able to infiltrate water at a very high level. Earthworm numbers can be negatively impacted by waterlogging, compaction and tillage, but we can positively impact the earthworm numbers and support earthworm and increase their numbers by adding organic matter to the soil and optimising our soil pH. When we look at earthworms in the soil and do earthworm counts, we're looking for adult earthworms. So this is an adult earthworm. So basically you're looking for an earthworm which has a saddle, such as this one here on its back. So they're the reproductive organs of the earthworm, and that's indicating that it is an adult earthworm. We don't count the juvenile or the young earthworms when we're doing worm counts. And ideally you're looking, if you dig a spade depth about 20 by 20 by 20 centimetres, you're looking for about 10 to 15 earthworms in that spade depth of soil, and that's going to indicate quite a high biological activity and a high biological health of your soil. Root structure is also worth looking at. And I suppose when we're looking at root structure, we're looking at the root depth and abundance. So obviously, the greater the abundance of roots, the better the ability we have to sequester carbon and to take greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere and store them in the soil. The roots also have obviously the ability to access nutrients, and the greater abundance of roots, the more nutrients which can be accessed by the plant. And again, as those roots turn over and die over time, you know, they're opening up channels in the soil, and air movement and water filtration will be improved by having a good abundance of roots there as well. Similar to your earthworm count, we will negatively impact our root structures by waterlogging and compaction. So again, they're things we're trying to minimize in our soils. Moving on to the physical attributes of soil health, I suppose it's important to know and understand your soil texture. There are a number of different textures, and we'll fly through them briefly in a moment, but there's not much we can do to change the texture of our soil, but it is important to understand the texture of the soil you have in your farm, and many farms will have numerous different soil textures rather than just one texture, but that does influence the workability and trafficability of your soil. And we all have fields which, you know, we can put animals out to earlier in the spring, or, you know, which fields which are slower to maybe burn up during the summer. So, you know, we do know as it stands there are differences in terms of the texture of the soil in some fields on our farms. It's important to optimize water balance, and in some instances this may be necessary through drainage. Again, we're trying to minimize compaction to improve our soil structure. So in terms of the different textures or characteristics of soil, we have sand, silt, clay, peaty and loam soils. Your sandy soils will have the largest particle size, large air spaces. These tend to be be more drought sensitive. So you're all well aware of the sandy soils. They're the fields you can get out to earlier in the spring, but they burn up, the first fields to burn up then in the summer. So they have, I suppose, pros and cons to them. Silty soils then have a slightly smaller particle size and more restricted air movement. And as we move through then into clay, or they have the smallest particle size, very restricted air and water movement. And, you know, they do tend to hold high levels of nutrients, as we discussed earlier. And obviously then there's peaty and loam soils, and also chalk soils, which would be classed as alkaline soils. And the chalk soils are often shallow and free draining as well. When we're assessing soil health, and I always say, you know, the spade is the most useful tool we have on our farms, because, you know, going out and digging a field with a spade tells us an awful lot in terms of what's happening below the ground. So I suppose it's important when we're assessing the health of our soil. So we're going to dig three widths of the spade. So the left-hand side across the top and over on the right-hand side, and we're going to flip it over from this side over on top of itself, basically. So we want to leave the fourth side undisturbed by the spade, because that's the side we're going to assess to have a look at the root structure and the porosity of the soil on that fourth untouched side. So a really useful tool to understand your physical soil health is a VEST chart. So this is a visual estimation or visual evaluation of soil structure. This is available from the Teagasc website and also AHDB or the SRUC website in the UK. And it's a very simple means to take out in the field with your spade, and as I say, dig a hole as I described there, and have a look at the structure of your soil to get a better understanding in terms of the physical health of your soil. So basically, soil structure affects root penetration, water availability, and plants and soil aeration. And this is a really quick test to look at the appearance and the feel of a block of soil. And it rates a soil then on a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is a very good structure. So it's a nice friable soil with plenty of air movement and porosity in the soil, to a very poor structure, which would be considered number 5. And this is very dense, compacted, poorly aerated soil. You want to do this soil test when the soil is moist but not wet. So I would suggest it's probably a little bit wet with the rainfall we've had here over recent weeks anyhow to do it accurately. But ideally, I suppose late spring or, you know, early autumn are good times to do it, when there's a bit of moisture there in the ground and it hasn't got too dry or too wet. And essentially what you're trying to do is visually assess the aggregate size, shape, strength, the pore structure and root distribution of your soil. So a couple of examples I'm going to show you now. This is, I suppose, as you can see, a very friable soil, plenty of root depth or an abundance through this soil, and the root is moving through entirely through this block of soil. It was actually, when we dug this, it was quite hard to hold it together. It was so friable, it was pretty much just breaking up in our hands. There was no layers within this block. And I suppose you can see both earthworms there through the soil, but you can tell by looking at that that's a very porous soil, which is going to allow water to penetrate down quickly. Because of the earthworms, again, it's a positive indicator from a biological aspect. And another thing you can look at, or essentially use another sense, is to smell the soil. Okay, so you're looking for that nice earthy smell from your soil. It's a nice healthy smell. Really don't want to have that sulfur or rotten egg smell from our soils. This is another field which we went out to, and I suppose the issue with this field was farmer was just, not happy with the performance of the sward above ground. And I suppose looking at how a sward is performing is a good indicator maybe as to a problem below ground. But it was, not that long since being reseeded, but the grass really wasn't performing on this farm. So you can see here, it's very blocky. The roots aren't traveling down through this. This blue color here is a sign of severe compaction and being waterlogged for a period of time. The orange color in here that we're looking at, this is a sign that this soil down here has dried out, got wet again and dried out. Okay, so again, it's been waterlogged at times, but not on a continual basis. There's no roots traveling down through the top couple of inches here of the soil. They are getting down through the wider, larger cracks in the soil. But overall, looking at that compared to the previous soil, it's very easy to tell that it's not a healthy soil and would be considered 5 on that the VES chart. It's large angular blocks within the soil. So this is one of the blocks of soil that broke off from the main sod. And you literally could not squeeze that, could not break that up between your hands. So major compaction issues here in the soil, and it will take quite a while, I suppose, to remedy and assess or correct the issues that have occurred there. In terms of management of compact soils, organic manure, I think, is hugely important where we have it. And I know we don't have as much of it around these days as we did a number of years ago, but it is hugely valuable in helping to build up the organic matter in our soil, to feed the biology in our soils, to get more earthworms into our soils, and to let them do some of the work that nature showed in terms of helping open up and aerating soils. Need to reduce traffic, and Harley's going to talk about so I won't go into it, but with compact soils, you really just need to think about when you're traveling them, and stay off them if you can at all, when conditions aren't optimum, because you'll do more harm than good. Maintaining green cover, and I suppose this is more relevant to the tillage sector maybe than the grassland sector, but having cover crops on tillage farms over the winter to minimise the bare soils to help reduce erosion and help keep the soil alive below ground. Mechanical intervention is an option. I would say prevention is always better than cure, though. I'm not personally a big fan of mechanical intervention. Obviously, it does have a place at certain times, but you really need to think about what you're doing. If the sward above isn't performing, then maybe ploughing is going to help rectify or break a pan. But it's always important when you have an issue of compaction to go out with a spade and identify where that level of compaction is actually happening. Because if it's further down in the soil, you want to make sure that if you are going to plough, that you are actually going to break that pan, that you're not just traveling over the top and not going to make any difference to it. Aerators or surface slitters are an option on where compaction is occurring and more shallow up in the soil, and sward lifters obviously where you have a deeper level of compaction. But I would say it's really important, if you're considering any mechanical intervention to overcome compaction, is to make sure you're get somebody in who knows what they're talking about and knows what they're doing, because it's very easy to do more harm than good with machinery on compacted ground. You need to assess as you go to ensure you're having a positive effect. So after you do a run, again, go back out with that spade and make sure it's having the desired effect, and you're not actually making the problem that you have worse than it already is. And I suppose the deeper we go down in terms of our mechanical intervention, the more we need to consider, or the more diesel we're going to be burning. So you do need to consider your return on investment, and what will the cost of intervention be versus the return which you get from trying to remedy the problem. In terms of, I suppose, just to summarise, in terms of the soil health principles, it's always important that we balance our chemical, physical and biological properties and have them all working together in unison, focusing on just one and neglecting the other two, the soil will be out of balance. We won't have resilient soils, and our soils, we won't get the performance from our soils that we should. Always, useful to consider your soil type in terms of when you can work that soil, be that grazing or going out and tilling up the soil. Surface assessment, I suppose, and by this I mean, looking at what's happening above the ground, looking at your sward and understanding, how that's, if that's not performing as well as it should, despite your chemical or your soil test results telling you everything is in order, then we'd go in with a spade and have a dig and look at the soil below ground and see, if we can see any issues there from a biological or physical perspective. Minimising soil disturbance, so I suppose reducing tillage practices where possible, and only really going in with machinery onto fields when absolutely necessary. Maximise your soil cover, which maximise your living roots. So consider, more diversity in our swards, be that, including clover or including multi-species, which will have a beneficial effect in terms of deeper rooting abilities. And I suppose optimising the biodiversity of our swards. And they're all kind of some of the key principles to support and enhance soil health, to try and maintain resilient soils into the future. So I want to thank you very much for your time. I'm going to stop sharing my slides now, and I'll hand over to Harley.
While Harley's getting his slides organised, Mary, there's a few questions coming in. And one of them, you've been a big advocate for farmyard manure and improving soil health. But one of the questions is, does slurry have a part to play in that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, William, I love seeing, I suppose, I nearly always smile when I see farmyard manure in yards. I love seeing it. I think it's a hugely valuable asset for farmers to have. But slurry will also have a beneficial effect. There's plenty of research out there which will show that slurry does add organic matter to the soil. We might lose more ammonia from slurry than we will from farmyard manure, but we all have plenty of slurry on our farms, and it does help build up the organic matter and the fertility of our soils, and it's an alternative to chemical fertilizer as well. So it's friendly on the pocket, so it does definitely have a role. I suppose it's important just to consider soil conditions when you're applying your slurry. If your soil is already on the wet side or slightly saturated, we just need to be really careful that we're not filling all those air spaces and smothering what's below the ground or drowning out what's below the ground essentially.
Thank you, Mary. I'd just now like to hand over to Harley Brown-Keech, who'll take us through the next presentation.
Hello, good evening, and thank you for joining tonight. I'm going to be discussing all things soil health in relation to a plan for spring reseeding. But most of what I cover tonight will be relevant to reseeding any time of the year also. We need to start with the building blocks of the entire system, as Mary's been outlining, the soil and its overall health. Regularly soil testing will give you a data set to understand how your soil is changing over time and what is working well on the farm and not so well in terms of soil health, but will allow you to remedy issues in quicker time. Soil testing needs to be completed before any nutrient applications take place, whether organic or artificial. Remembering, if you are completing the sampling yourself, to be taking a minimum of 25 subsamples per hectare in that classic W pattern over the field. For those with lower soil indices, we should be aiming to test at the lower end of the range, and the range being that 3 to 5 years. With those who have a system in place and more stable results, looking towards the upper end of the range. Although management method of the lay will also direct the soil testing frequency. Your lower input systems would push the upper limits compared with intensively managed systems which would sit at the lower end of the range. How you correct the deficiencies will depend on what they are and what tools you have available to correct the specifics. The standard soil analysis package we should all be aiming to use measures soil acidity, the potential of hydrogen, and estimates the plant available concentrations of the major nutrients being phosphorus, potassium, and magnesium in the soil. Soil acidity is measured as pH, the concentration of hydrogen ions, with a logarithmic scale running from pH 1, very acidic, through pH 7, neutral, to pH 14 as very alkaline. The range found when soil sampling is likely to be between 4.5 to 8.5. And as Mary's outlined, we're aiming for that target between 6.2 and 6.5. The target for pH and the results you have can produce significant impacts on yield to a lay. Correcting soil pH will deliver significantly more yield, while also improving the persistency of the grass and clover. As you can see on the slide, an increase in pH of 1.5 produced a yield increase of plus 35%. So for those of you working figures, you can easily identify that an application of lime cost versus the overall yield increase pays for itself instantly. But secondly to that, looking at the environmental benefit of reduced greenhouse gas emissions, a pH of 6.9 will have 27% lower emissions of nitrous oxide than a soil in a sward at pH 5.4, a very positive added benefit off of the back of correcting your pH for the aiming of increasing your overall lay output. With those under contracts where buyers are pushing for tighter environmental controls, correcting your pH can be a quick win for this. The reason for the emphasis or urge to correct your soil pH is explained on the slide here. As you can see, at certain pHs, the availability of nutrients is better. As soon as the soil pH is below the target, fertilizer efficiency drops, as it is locked up or lost, with plants not having access to it. For example, at pH 6, nitrogen efficiency drops to 89%, compared with a pH of 7. While phosphorus is even more effective at just 52% efficiency. Across the board for the nutrients at that pH, nearly 20% of fertilizer is wasted, a figure which increases to 32% at pH 5.5. Once lime is applied and is washed in, it starts to adjust to soil pH. At least 35% of ground limestone has a particle size of under 0.15 millimeters. This component of the lime is fast acting, very reactive, and will start working immediately within sort of 0 to 6 months. The remaining 65% of the lime will be broken down in the soil in the medium term, being 6 to 24 months, and helps to maintain soil pH levels in the longer term until the soils are resampled in years 4 and 5. Anything larger than 2 millimeter particle size will be an investment for your offspring to reap the reward on. The choice is really between a granulated lime, which reacts quickly to neutralize acidity, or bulk lime, which is a more persistent liming material. If you're working in less than ideal soil conditions and want to prevent soil compaction, granulated lime is convenient as it can be spread using a fertilizer spreader. However, it is more expensive than the alternative, so it's probably best to go with this option if you don't need too much and the soil conditions are not ideal. Here we are looking at a study completed by Shale, Wall and Layla in 2013, comparing soil test P 12 months after applications of phosphate and lime and both combined, showing that the control of no phosphate and lime has a very negligible rise, whereas a lime application results in an index increase of 2, a P index rise of 3, and a combination of lime and phosphate applied gives an off-the-scale increase. Well, you may well be asking, the phosphate application gives a better increase than the lime from the control, but we need to consider the cost of the phosphate applied versus the lime, with lime sitting around €25 a tonne spread and say £46 a tonne spread respectively. And the other benefits of the lime application not recorded here in terms of the other nutrient availability, as we saw on the previous slide, but also alongside the sensitivity in Ireland and Great Britain to an extent of applying large amounts of phosphate. Alongside pH, we do need to ensure an adequate supply of nutrients. There are a number of mineral nutrients essential for plant growth, alongside non-mineral nutrients being carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. The nutrients all provide separate benefits to the plant. I have listed the major nutrients here and their respective benefits. Potash will be required in greater quantities than nitrogen or phosphate, with potash helping to maximize efficient nitrogen use. But when soil testing, we do need to assess calcium, magnesium, and sodium levels, as this can mask potash availability. Sulfur should be applied in a timely fashion and can fall foul of high rainfall, which unfortunately we do all seem to be experiencing more of. This is due to the sulfur acting in a very similar vein to the nitrogen and readily leaching in its sulfate form. Sulfur should be applied in conjunction with nitrogen over the growing season. Back in 2019, analysis showed that 88% of UK grasslands were deficient in sulfur, and with nitrogen uptake being limited due to a lack of sulfur presence, it can become a costly exercise. We need to be applying a ratio of 14:1 for nitrogen versus sulfur respectively to ensure the symbiotic nature of the two nutrients. The other nutrients not mentioned all play a vital part in the plant health and growth. If you think you have a problem with a nutrient deficiency, leaf tissue analysis can be beneficial alongside seeking advice from a qualified professional to begin that corrective action plan. To put some monetary values in terms of loss of production for a clamp grass silage system due to poor soil health, the numbers on the slide do speak for themselves, but this highlights how important the preparation work is for soils. If the three combined listed on the slide aren't at the target levels, we could be seeing a loss of per hectare of upwards of £864 or €1,036. So most of the work done to correct these values is a very long-term process, which does require careful consideration and planning. And lastly, on nutrients, I wanted to highlight the need for maintenance of the grassland you manage and how quickly forage can remove potash and phosphate from the field in every trailer load of silage carted away. This needs to be accounted for in the return from muck and slurry to the fields and a program for when these are to be added. For example, one silage trailer carrying 20 tonne is removing on average 34 kilos of phosphate and 120 kilos of potash. Spring reseeding, a question for you all, would you include clover in your mixture? Well, this will depend on when you are looking to drill and any weed pressures you know of historically. Herbs and legumes need a warming soil of 8 degrees and above compared to its perennial ryegrass counterpart, which begins to switch on at 5 degrees. But regardless of whether you include clover or not, research has demonstrated improved soil structure due to increased white clover component in the sward. White clover can decrease the density of soils and increase porosity, give an increased nutrient recovery from less than 50% to over 75%, and the general movement of nutrient improves, and hence we also see an increase in the grass yield. Here we are looking at the effect on grass and clover at different nitrogen levels compared to grass-only swards. Research has consistently shown that the inclusion of clover in our swards at very low levels of artificial nitrogen will allow the same level of production as a grass only at 250 kilos of nitrogen applied. You can see a yield difference in clover treatment and no nitrogen applications compared to 250 kilos of nitrogen applied is only 1.1 tonne of dry matter a hectare. In this trial, clover content ranged from 33% for the no nitrogen treatment to 19.6% in the 250 kilos of nitrogen treatment. And also the zero nitrogen treatment fixed 220 kilos of atmospheric N compared to 112 kilos of atmospheric N fixed on the 250 kilo applied treatment. So this is pushing the need for targeted fertilizer application on your grass and clover swards early season before the clover has awakened, once those soil temperatures begin pushing 8 degrees plus. The Climate Action Plan has set a maximum limit of 300,000 tonnes of nitrogen fertiliser use in Irish agriculture by 2030, a reduction of 99,000 tonne on the 2021 levels. Biological nitrogen fixation, also known as diazotrophy, is a biochemical process in which atmospheric nitrogen is converted into ammonia by certain rhizobia bacteria, which possesses a nitrogenous enzyme. The nitrogen fixed by rhizobia in root nodules is available for plant use. Low soil pH reduces the availability of nutrients to the plant, and low pH soils can be deficient in plant available calcium and magnesium, both necessary for rhizobia survival. If your pH is low, manganese and aluminium toxicity can also have a major effect on white clover development. Nodule formation is severely restricted at a pH less than 5.8, with sulfur supporting clover growth and the biological nitrogen fixation process. Calcium, sodium, and molybdenum are needed for clover growth, and boron, molybdenum, iron, cobalt, calcium, and copper are all required for nodule development and function. A demanding plant indeed, but a huge return on investment potential, as we have seen earlier from the yield benefits. The colour and number of nodules influences level of nitrogen fixation. Regardless of your plant species, if there are about 15 nodules found on the roots of one plant and most of them are red inside, it can be assumed that the nitrogen fixating bacteria are performing well. The size of the nodules is important, with evenly distributed nodules of regular size, often indicating higher nitrogen fixation rates than the presence of a few very large nodules. Distribution of the nodules on the roots is important. If we have nodules in the upper rooting zone only, this may indicate a shortage of air in the lower root zone. In such cases, better soil structure may improve aeration of the lower root zone and access to nitrogen, and as a result of it, induce development of nodules in deeper soil layers. If you find nodules on the taproot or the main root only, this can also indicate that the bacteria are trying to compensate for the low fixation ability by increasing their numbers inside the nodules themselves. We will all understand the soils you're farming, their positives and negatives, and this will play a huge role in our plans and actions over time. But how many of us are going out with a spade, walking the ground and doing a physical assessment of our soil structure? Doing so will provide a light on the state of soil compaction, if any, how deep this is, and when we can alleviate it. As Mary's mentioned, there are many good soil scorecards and guides online to use as a base for your assessment, but remember a few simple rules. Dig your soil pits away from likely compacted areas, gateways, ring feeders, water troughs. Dig 3 sides and fold the soil block out and dig deep enough so we can see the full soil profile. But do dig a few soil pits across the field to gain an average understanding of the soil structure. But it also may be worth digging assessment pits in compacted areas to gain an understanding of how your soil is behaving and identifying ways to alleviate the problems to bring your field to an even result on the soil scorecard. And then use these assessments to create a plan on the remedial work and the timeliness of these, because roots, water and air need space in the soil profile and also the ability to move freely. I'm sure we've all seen these pictures before, but I wanted to highlight the compaction potential of running machinery on vulnerable ground. What we're looking at is a trailer with super singles on one side and flotation tires on the other, running over a soil section, and a visual picture of how deep from one pass the compaction can reach. This trial saw a 68% reduction in the levels of compaction from switching to flotations from super singles alone. Furthermore to the pictures previously, here we have some trials work conducted by SRUC, comparing animal and machinery compaction versus a control of no traffic or animals. Both compaction types provided a yield reduction of 22% for machinery and 14% for animals, reaffirming the need to manage the grasslands appropriately during the season to mitigate, where possible, the potential harm we could do at any time. A big factor in your spring reseed will also come down to kit availability, timeliness, and dare I say, weather events. I'm going to work through the various cultivation methods available. Much of the decision, though, will be down to individual preferences, needs, and aims. Disking, one-pass cultivation, and ploughing all create a tilted soil. The creatine work from Ireland here is showing yield differences between the different reseeding methods. You'll notice there isn't a great difference in the yield between ploughing, disking, and min-till reseeding operations, provided they are established and well managed post-drilling. But one system does have considerably more passes than the other and cost implications. Back in 2016, and dare I say 8 years ago now, AHDB conducted a reseeding survey with 46% of farmers opting to go with a full ploughed till and sow operation. But as an industry, we are tasked to capture more carbon, so I would expect that figure to be lower now. But whatever option you choose here, we do need again to ensure good seed to soil contact and consolidation. Ploughing. Historically, the favoured way of reseeding, and ploughing's intention is to destroy old swards and species. Whether you glyphosate or not is a choice of the system you run, but it does allow us to deal with perennial weed species. Your old sward will rot down and release nutrients, and it allows you to bury FYM or slurry, and does allow lime to be spread on ploughing first before working it down. The important thing is to achieve a level, uniform seedbed, with seeds sown at a consistent depth, I cannot stress enough a fine, firm seedbed with shallow drilling. These seeds are very small in size and energy reserves to reach the light. Different ploughs go in at different depths, so it can create a whole new weed burden, especially if you are aware of historic weed burdens in the field. What you plough down could be ploughing up a whole new problem. And again, there are extra costs in diesel, passes, labour, and the impact it can have to the soil biology, as Mary mentioned earlier. You can up to half a worm count after ploughing, alongside carbon release. But having said all that, in the right scenario, it can be the best option available. There are many types of drills on the market now which have different discs, inverted T's and rollers. The key and success of it is to break down the trash or the thatch on the surface to create that fine, firm seedbed with good seed to soil contact. This is a low soil disturbance pass with less carbon release compared to ploughing and less weed disturbance in the plough. You do need a solid soil structure and avoid vulnerable conditions. But supplementary to that, it can then carry animals better in a shorter time frame after the operation. But you don't really have a chance to address compaction unless you go in and use a sward lifter or aerator. The top layer can be difficult if there's a layer of trash or thatch to deal with, and if sprayed off, the dying thatch can be acidic. So think about peeled lime to neutralize the pH of that decaying layer. To raise the pH by 0.1, you want to be applying around 75 kilos a hectare of calcifert. This min-till operation can work well on stony and some shallow soils though. No-till direct drilling is much the same as your min-till operation. We're going to spray off the old ley, graze hard or silage to remove the forage, and as much thatch as possible, and then slot seed into the old decaying sward. It is vital that the dying material is removed again by either grazing or cutting, as the remaining thatch could become acidic as it decomposes, and that will actually scorch or kill the seedlings that are emerging and coming through. You do want to harrow with a tine harrow to break the thatch before direct drilling 2 or 3 times to really open up that base. And again, it would be worth adding some quick acting peeled lime to neutralize that acidic surface. But with all these operations, drilling the grass, you can use any mixture of diploids and tetraploids, herbs and legumes, as there is no competition from the sprayed off ley. Conversely though, if you look at an overseeding into a live sward, if you wanted to overseed into a burnt off sward, much of the process surrounding direct drilling would be appropriate, but we're specifically looking here at overseeding into a live sward. So the timing of the overseeding into the existing sward will be key. May and June will likely be too aggressive in grass growth for the new seeds to have a fighting chance. And again, you want to remove that cover by grazing hard or cutting, and really harrow 2 or 3 passes to get seed light to the base. We know we need those seeds hitting the soil, not lying on a mat of existing grass. You can always, after seeding, use a light class of stock to tread in the seeds, mimicking rolling and keeping the existing sward at bay for circa a week to 10 days. Once you see the new shoots appearing, fetch your stock off so they don't graze out the new seedlings. Seed mixture will be important here in the overseeding. We want to be using tetraploids as these are a bigger seed compared to a diploid and have more energy and strike, which will help when competing against the existing grass. Adding in other herbs and legumes during an overseed can give patchy results. And if you're looking for the ultimate benefits that the herbs and legumes bring, then use these in full reseed scenarios would be that preferred method. Once you have drilled for all the options outlined here tonight, you should simulate grazing once established. So do that classic finger and thumb pull test. If you walk into the field and wrap your finger around the grass shoots, and as you pull out and you pull the root out alongside, then the plant is not ready to be grazed. If the roots stay in the ground and the grass blades rip off, mimicking grazing, you're ready to start with a light grazing. And this could be around 6 to 7 weeks from overseeding. Overall, the important things to remember here tonight in regard to soils are pH, phosphate and potash are important. And remember, some older grassland can be poorer in fertility. Just because they are producing forage doesn't mean the layers is optimum. There could always be more. Timings are crucial for all steps in the reseeding process. Select times of year when the existing soil will be less aggressive or soil conditions for travel aren't detrimental. If you're using clover, consider previous weed pressures and future nitrogen management, not forgetting those warming soils are crucial. There are many modern grass drills, all can be extremely successful in the correct circumstances with the right preparation to rejuvenate your grassland. And if you are direct drilling, cross drilling in that diamond shape will help with ground cover also. But whichever way, harrow to really open up that sward to remove the dead, feggy grasses to help allow sunlight to the new seedlings. And lastly, if anyone does have any questions or areas they would like to discuss in further detail, please don't hesitate to get in contact. Thank you.
Thank you, Harley. And while you stop sharing, we'll give you a minute to catch your breath. I have a question here for Mary that's come in. You mentioned quite a bit about multi-species there earlier on, Mary. And the question is, what species would you advocate and advise for aiding and helping in soil structure?
So when it comes to the species you're going to include, you're looking at species which are going to have a different rooting depth, beyond maybe just what your standard perennial ryegrass might have. So what we do see is those deeper rooting species, such as the likes of red clover, have the ability to help in terms of opening up a soil. Chicory will also have the same benefit, has a deep taproot, nearly like a dock, for want of a better word. So that can work down into the soil and open up the soil and help alleviate compaction. So essentially it will depend, I suppose, William, on what your end use is. If it's going to be a silage field, red clover could potentially have a role to play there. If it's grazing, including like maybe your clovers, so your white clover, your chicory and some plantain along with your perennial ryegrass will have a beneficial effect there.
Right, thanks, Mary. One for Harley here, quite a technical one for you, Harley. In a UK climate, can we produce the 220 kilograms per hectare of nitrogen from clover alone? And it's basically saying, do we have the soil temperatures or the average day length to achieve these levels?
On average, you'll be looking around 150 to 180, depending on your clover content, and it will all be down to clover content. And you're aiming for around 30% clover content in your field. If you walk out into the field and you assess how much clover you think you have there, say 60, 70%, you always want to half the recommendation you think you have, because when you're assessing your lay, you're looking at clover like a dinner plate in the field. A dinner plate on your dining room table, whereas you're looking at perennial ryegrass like a dinner plate stacked in the racking. So always halve what you think you have there. But furthermore to that, the new leg project we're involved in and looking at novel products is aiming to push nitrogen fixation up to that 220 to 250, 300 kilos of nitrogen, comparing elite strains of rhizobium with novel products to push the boundaries of biological nitrogen fixation from the clovers.
Thanks, Harley. One here back on soil chemistry for Mary. Is it true that low soil pHs encourage native grass to grow, not perennial ryegrass?
Yeah, so where we see lower soil pH, like so different species will be able to maybe tolerate lower soil pH compared to what perennial ryegrass will. So if pH drops off, we often see, the less desirable species come into the fore, and often that's also linked to lower soil fertility in those soils. So optimizing your pH is really important to optimize your perennial ryegrass content in your sward.
And one for Harley this time. Many crops drilled after late harvested maize this year have failed because of the cold, wet weather. What's your advice currently for these fields, Harley?
As everything, it's no one answer will fit all. You want to be looking at the mixture choice you're putting in after the maize, looking for, say, Italians that will grow at a lower soil temperature. Would be the ideal advice. Although soil conditions may not allow you to travel very well, there may be other options to get that seed onto the ground and get a green cover growing. Other than that, you're going to have to hope that what you have grown will establish at some point and has a root network there to begin trapping nutrients.
Right, thanks, Harley. This one, I think I will give both of you the opportunity to answer it. I'm not sure who will have the answer to this one. It's quite a technical question. It's how much carbon can be collected in 1 acre of productive grassland? And that's quite a challenging question, I would say. So either one of the two of you, if you've got any answers, would be much appreciated.
I think there'll be a few factors at play there. Soil type, previous management, above ground biomass, you know, and the amount of roots you have in the soil. Roots are carbon, and they will have an effect on that alongside organic matter content.
One here, I think for Mary, it says, can I improve water infiltration by using calcium lime?
So, by using it, I suppose by using limestone on its own, it'll have a beneficial effect in terms of improving your biology. It'll also, if you improve your biology, you're going to generally have a positive effect in terms of improving your physical structure, because you're going to improve your rooting depth. You're also going to improve your biology in terms of your earthworm count. So yeah, you will probably have a beneficial effect in terms of improving your water infiltration, but it'll be a secondary effect probably to the lime rather than a direct result of the lime. It'll be the other benefits that the lime is bringing to the soil health that allows that water infiltration to improve.
Thank both of you for your presentations tonight and being so candid with your answers. And thank you everybody who has participated in our webinar this evening. It's been much appreciated, and hopefully you've found something of value in what both our speakers have said. Thank you all very much, and a good evening from all of us.